Welcome everyone to the first session in our Getting Off Gas series, Planning Your Electrification Journey. This event series forms part of our Getting Off Gas Toolkit, where we are supporting households to slash energy bills, cut emissions, and minimize health risks associated with burning fossil fuel inside our homes. We are incredibly lucky tonight to be joined by three fantastic panelists. Firstly, I'd like to welcome a good friend of Renew, Jenny Edwards. Jenny is the sole owner and director of Lighthouse Architecture and Science, a multi-award-winning practice that integrates science into the design process to deliver highly efficient, all-electric, climate-resilient homes, both new and renovated, in the Canberra region. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. And I should say I'm presenting from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people tonight.
Thank you. So also joining us is someone who will be no stranger to many in attendance, Alan Pearce. Alan is one of Australia's best regarded sustainability experts. He is a senior industry fellow at RMIT University and fellow at University of Melbourne. He advises several industry and community organisations and works as a consultant. He also writes a column in every issue of Renew magazine. Thanks for joining us, Alan. And finally, we are very pleased to welcome Anne Martinelli. Anne is part of the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action's Gas Substitution Roadmap team, helping to deliver the Victorian Government's gas reform and electrification agenda. An agricultural scientist by training, Anne's worked in the sustainable built environment space for more than a decade, working with Environment Victoria, Renew, and most recently as a brief stint as the Interim Executive Director of the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, or ASBEC. Thank you for joining us, Anne.
Thanks very much. I can't tell you how nice it is to be back with the Renew community, and I'm joining you tonight from the lands of the Wurundjeri people.
So we're about to kick off with our panel discussion for tonight, and there'll be plenty of time for questions for our excellent panelists. But before we do, we just want to share a quick video with you that we filmed on the experiences of some members of our community who had been planning the first steps to their household electrification.
Going all electric is something that didn't happen as a specific intention at the start. It was something that came upon us just from the desire to get off fossil fuels, I guess. In 2008, I went to school to study renewable energy because I wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
For us, it's a lot about the health factors of gas. I have a lot of health issues, my family do, but we know that having gas appliances in your home creates a worse air quality. That's a fact.
First thing that we actively, not so much electrified as got off gas, was our gas hot water. Then went to the solar hot water. So evacuated tube hot water system with electric backup, electric boosting. Once we'd done that, the only gas appliance that we had in the house was the cooker. That we got rid of finally when we remodeled the kitchen.
First thing that we did to electrify was we actually had to make sure that our heating was working. So for us, it was the heater that was the priority.
Yeah.
Once we worked out that was working in the split system, we felt confident to take the gas heater out.
Back in 2007, I was deeply concerned about climate change, and I'd just left a job that I'd been at for over 10 years, and I hadn't had long service leave, so I used the long service leave payment to put solar on the roof at the time. I just put a 1 kilowatt system on the roof. Back in 2007, my daughter was 10 and my son was 8. And I could see their futures as being heavily impacted by climate change. Yeah, and it just was not something that I wanted.
We barely notice the additional cost in our electric use going over to the hot water system, and now that we have solar, it can run on a timer when we have solar generation. So that's definitely just the improved efficiency for electric appliances over the gas. It's just we don't have to cut back our usage. We can run a bath and it can get replenished by our solar system compared to just having to run the gas.
Gas costs you not just horrendously because the cost of gas has gone up, but also when you're down to a single appliance in the household with gas, the majority payment that you have is your service fee. And by getting off gas, you can get rid of that, which is just such a bonus, and it's one less bill to pay.
I think it's when it's the heating is really when you save some money, because you're using so much gas to heat a home, and particularly in Australia, our homes are very leaky, so you're just constantly pumping heat in. So for us, I don't think it's as cash positive immediately, but in the long term, we know we'll be saving. You know, if you convert to electricity, we know that that is going to decrease. There's reports out there of the grid decarbonising. So it's, you continually improving, whereas if you're on gas, it's just going to continue being the same.
Gas used to be the good flame, but is no longer. And the faster we can replace it, the better.
Thank you to all of our participants for giving us your time to make the videos. And it was really valuable to see people's stories and how they see their getting off gas journey. So I'm going to ask our panel to start with your understanding of why you think it's important for households to get off gas, and why is it something that everyone should be considering now? Do we have anyone that wants to start?
I'm happy to go. Look, it's great for the environment, but it's great for you and your home, and presumably the people who live with you, who you love, in terms of your comfort and your health and climate resilience. And it will save you money. So it really is a win-win-win. So it just makes great sense from every perspective.
Anne, do you have something to add?
Yeah, sure. Look, yes to all of that. I mean, I think they're the headline messages that really we just want to be getting out there to as many people as possible. But something that I think that's been bubbling around in the background for a while that is only just starting to grab everybody's attention is we're actually facing some gas supply shortfalls as well. So AEMO is forecasting that the southeastern states might be looking at some how do you describe it? Some days where there's not enough gas in winter, as early as 2026, which is really not that far away. So that's starting to really, I think, focus people's minds on not just the opportunities, but really the necessity to be electrifying those uses across the economy where there really is already mature, cost-effective electric alternatives available. That's not the case for every gas use across the economy, but in buildings, 100%, and certainly in residential buildings, that technology is ready there today, and we just really need to electrify those uses.
We'll get into some of those bigger picture policy problems in a minute. I'll just jump to Alan and see if tell me why it's important.
Yeah. Well, building on what Anne was saying, people may not realise, but across all of the southern states, winter gas consumption is like 3 times as high in winter as it is in summer. But also, we rely a lot more on gas-fired electricity in the middle of winter too. And so associated with those big spikes in demand is high prices for both gas and electricity. So we actually need to electrify efficiently, as others have already said, to deal with the supply issues. And of course, as Jenny and Anne have said, there's plenty of other reasons, including improved health. And in my case, it was like, well, I was paying both the gas and electricity fixed supply charges, which were 2/3 of my bill. So it was sort of pretty obvious that one of them could go.
I mean, it's a good point, and we may as well hit on it now. So how do consumers know where their electricity or their electricity is coming from? Like, how do consumers have any kind of agency over that issue?
Well, I guess there's the obvious answer to that, which is, people do have the opportunity to switch retailers and choose green power products and all of those sorts of options within the energy market that we have, that has been set up to enable that sort of switching to get a price. So, the Victorian government has the Energy Compare website that allows people to jump on there and see if they can get a better deal from a different retailer. But I think, the fundamental issue there, maybe that you're touching on there, Rachel, is just we basically, what we want are the services that energy provide. We want heating, we want cooling, we want cooking, we want hot water. Quite understandably, I guess that's not something that a lot of people other than us energy nerds thinks about 100% of the time of the day. And really, for a lot of people, that stuff just happens. And for most people, that is provided by a mix of gas and electricity. So I think, we are dealing with a situation where, particularly in Victoria, where I am, gas is just woven into everyday life. I think people just don't even think about it. So even just that consciousness of particularly, and I think this is something we'll get to later when we're thinking about decisions that people are making at, say, at the end of life, replacing an appliance, to even consider, is there a different way that this service could be provided? Because people are used to just, oh, well, gas, hot water is gas or heating is gas, may not be aware that there's another option there to deliver basically the service, which is the outcome that we want.
Yeah, just to build on that too, I mean, Victoria has been very lucky to have very large amounts of very cheap gas coming from under Bass Strait, and they are now running down very fast, which is why people are getting concerned about the winter gas shortages. And the most likely sources of more gas are from possibly importing liquefied natural gas by ship, possibly from Western Australia or somewhere else at world prices, or piping gas from the coal seam gas fields in Queensland, which again is not going to be cheap. So they're really basic issues. But we should still remember that, a fair bit of Victoria's electricity is still coming from our brown coal-fired power stations. So we're heading on a rapid downward trajectory. But the gas and coal are still dominant in Victoria's electricity supply, unless you happen to have rooftop solar and you're generating it yourself and using it when it's producing.
I mean, it'd be good to ask though, considering we are all from Southeastern Australia, but if I was to pose this question to people from other parts of the country, what would be your justification for people who, let's say, don't have a whole lot of gas in the state mix? Why should they think about switching to electric? And is it going to be the right decision for all Australians?
Well, one issue, say if you're in Queensland, you won't actually be using that much gas, which means the fixed supply charges will actually be quite a significant factor for you. And in a sense, that's the challenge we face. It's like I can reduce my gas use, but until I go off gas, I don't avoid the fixed supply charge.
Mm.
And that's where, again, in Queensland, people have a mix of options, not just electricity, but in many cases, going off gas and using liquefied petroleum gas just for a little bit of cooking might even look worth doing.
Did you want to say something, Jenny?
Getting off gas, again, the fixed supply charge here in the ACT is $350, and which, again, most people don't realise. So that instant saving, and I just keep coming back to the health and comfort implications again, but that lack of awareness about that people don't realise how much they're compromising their health and the health of their family, and their comfort and their resilience of their house, and therefore their health moving forward in climate extremes. It really is a transition worth making right across the country.
And of course, there's the emissions benefit that, we are all powering as fast as we can towards renewables powered electricity grid. Any gas that you're burning in your home, you're burning a fossil fuel. And so even if, as you say, in other states, gas consumption might not be as high as it is in the southeastern states, it's still emissions we can cut by switching to electricity at the same time as continuing to pump more and more renewables into the system.
Well, while we're on that topic, Anne, I may as well ask you about the gas substitution roadmap and I guess what it's trying to do in the big mix of the way Australia uses gas.
Yeah, okay. So, well, look, Victoria has legislated some pretty ambitious climate emissions reduction targets. Victoria is also very aware that it's a very significant gas user, and a really significant proportion of Victoria's gas consumption is residential consumption, but particularly residential heating. So what the gas substitution roadmap that was released in July last year does is basically start to flag very clearly that Victoria recognises that they're two big problems that are related, and that Victoria needs a pathway to, decarbonise gas. So that's basically, I guess, a combination of electrification, but also energy efficiency, but also looking at renewable gas options for those harder to electrify uses. So getting back to the reliability and supply issues we touched on before, a really major motivator for wanting to go as hard and fast as we can on electrification is also to ensure that we've got reliable supply, particularly for large industrial users and manufacturers in Victoria that don't have a readily substitutable option at this point. Things like hydrogen might come along at some point, and they may well have important uses across the economy. But in the meantime, we really need to be, as I said before, I guess, switching over those uses where the cost-effective options are there already. That'll buy us some time for the renewable energy options to come online, but also make sure that we're really only using those renewable gas options where they're really needed and where there's not another alternative. So the Victorian government, has committed to releasing an update on the gas roadmap by the end of this year that will provide, I guess, the next step of policy commitments as we go down that path. And of course, the gas roadmap is just part of a broader suite of energy policies, important parts of which are obviously our renewable energy target, where Victoria's committed to 95% of our electricity being renewable power, like a 95% target by 2035. So I guess for those concerns about electricity still being basically fairly dirty in Victoria, Yes, it has been powered by brown coal, in the past and continues, but we are looking in a relatively short time frame for our electricity to be 95% renewables, which means that emissions parity between gas and electricity is actually not far away, and certainly within the lifetime of a lot of appliances that are in homes at the moment.
So if we're thinking about cost, and we have had some questions already about, the rising gas and electricity prices, Alan, what would you say to people who are saying, well, what's the difference if I get off gas, if my electricity bills, if I don't have rooftop solar and I can't access that, what's the difference, and why should I look to invest in that if my electricity bills are continuing to rise?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the trends, the reality is CSIRO and everyone else basically predicts that as renewables grow their share, they will bring the prices down most of the time. As I say, we've got issues of possibly high electricity prices in the middle of winter, but most of the year it'll be cheaper. And so that's the downward trend. If we look at gas, particularly in winter, if we're importing liquefied natural gas or pumping gas from coal seam fields in Queensland, then fundamentally you've got a high gas prices. And the other thing too is that since we built our 3 export liquefied natural gas plants in Queensland, our East Coast gas prices have been very much linked to global prices, or even higher, as the LNG guys try to sell more gas offshore. So I think the fundamental trends are pretty clear. And certainly also it's been demonstrated by Renew and many other studies that if you install rooftop solar, even with the very low feed-in prices and things that we're now getting, that's still helping you further to reduce your costs of electricity.
Could I just add to that, Rachel?
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
No, go.
So just to add to that, Alan, modelling that was released with the gas substitution roadmap last year and is on the website in the form of some fact sheets, show very clearly the cost savings between a dual fuel and an all electric home. But I think the important thing to note too is that renewable energy is not electrification. So all electric homes can be cheaper than dual fuel, whether you have solar or not. The thing about solar is that you've got daily and seasonal variation in terms of solar production. They don't always sync particularly neatly with showers and heating and all of those things, particularly in the southern states where, winter heating load is not necessarily a time where solar is going to be massive. But the key thing is that an efficient home that's already done all the basic stuff of insulation and draft sealing and then electrifying is really going to reap the benefits in those of electrification. And if you have solar as well, that is a bonus. But I think the really key issue around cost is just to recognise that we're constantly in this wicked situation, I guess, where the cost savings are easy to demonstrate. They've been there forever. The issue is the upfront costs that some people may face. And we need to be mindful that this electrification journey is something that is accessible to everybody. So just again, to put on my Victorian government hat, a fair bit of the focus for the gas substitution roadmap is around making sure that we have things like VEU, the Victorian Energy Upgrades subsidies that basically hopefully cover that gap between a like-for-like replacement of an appliance and an all-electric one where there's a difference. In a lot of cases, there's not a difference, but we do want to make sure that we don't have a situation where those who have the money to spend get the savings and others miss out. We need to make sure that we're addressing all of those barriers.
Yeah.
And just to give the listeners or watchers some hope and perspective on that, what does that all actually mean? So a few real world examples from our projects recently. It's really easy to halve your energy consumption going from gas to efficient electric. And if you team that up with a little bit of upgrade to energy efficiency of your home, even more. So more than halving your costs, because you are more than halving, easily halving your energy consumption. So it is real, people are doing this. Yep. And it is having genuine impact.
Well, I was going to ask you, Jenny, as a designer and as someone that talks to a lot of people, I assume for new builds and for renovations and retrofits, where do you start this conversation usually? So how do we start to plan people's electrification journeys?
By talking about the plan. The plan is really the key thing, is to have a plan, because people get caught out otherwise. You know, their hot water system breaks and along comes a plumber who tells them the cheapest thing to do is to replace it with another gas system, or their heating system goes down, and again they get the same misinformation. And so that happens frequently. So the big message tonight, everybody, is really do start planning now. You don't have to do it overnight, but have a plan in place. These appliances may break. You may not get a choice about when you do it. So plan ahead. You know, the three big ticket items are the heating, the hot water, and the cooking is less of a big ticket item, but it's the one that hangs on at the end and people are most reluctant about. But think about how you would like to make that switch. And each house is different. How efficient your house is, the layout of your house, in which climate zone you live, you know, will all affect the type and size of appliance you need, and whether you've got space to fit the appliance, and whether you might need some electrical upgrades. So I don't want to make it seem really complicated. In many cases, it's actually very simple. But have that plan and be wary of the tradies who tell you it's a bad idea. There's not so many of them out there now, but they certainly still exist, and they're one of the big obstacles. So, have that plan in place. And there are you know, Renew's got the fantastic resource. There's a little resource here in the ACT called Make the Switch website, maketheswitch.org.au, and it's actually got a calculator and an action planner checklist to help you look at the upfront costs and the payback period. So I encourage people to check that out.
Could I just also jump in, Rachel, to do a little plug also for the residential efficiency scorecard that is now being rolled out nationally. That, as Jenny said, it's the way to get a plan that you don't have to do straight off, but that's an in-home assessment where an assessor will come and talk you through your home, identify opportunities for upgrades that you can do over time. So that, as you say, when, you know, the biggest problem we've got is that if heating or hot water breaks down, it's an emergency decision. People don't want to spend 3 weeks with a complicated spreadsheet to decide what hot water they're going to get. They just will do whatever the plumber who comes has on the truck. So the scorecard is available to everybody in Victoria, across Australia. It's a great way to get that plan and to also have the conversation with a tradie who might have a different view. And if you are in Victoria, it's now eligible for a VU rebate, so it's pretty cheap.
Yeah, that's the other thing. As part of that planning, become familiar with the rebates that are available to you locally and nationally, because there are more and more. The upfront cost hopefully can be offset quite significantly for some families.
Yeah, well, I'll put it. Sorry, Alan.
Oh, I was going to step back a bit, because in fact, you can actually reduce your gas consumption quite a lot without spending lots more money. I mean, for example, you know, something like 3/4 of Australian homes have got a reverse cycle air conditioner for cooling, and that can replace some or all of your gas heating, which is your biggest part of your usage bill. Likewise, lots of people are now buying portable induction cooktop, just single hot plates, and I've actually gone off gas using 2 of those instead of replacing my gas stove. So my gas stove is now a platform for my induction cooktops. So, and they're just plug-in ones. So, you know, you don't have to invest in lots of rewiring and things like that. Likewise, you know, with hot water, the reality is if you're water efficient and don't have long showers, a lot of people's hot water now is actually electrically done from inside their dishwasher and their clothes washer. So running them on cold wash will save you electricity rather than gas. But you know, they're the sorts of things you can do, and I think that way you can learn to live with it and experience it, and then be confident in moving and getting off those fixed charges as well as taking the rest of the steps.
And they're great tips for renters, Alan, you know, renters who are, you know, don't have as much power in this situation. And you can, yes, stop using the gas and start using alternatives. But yes, using the split system that you think of only as a cooler, using that as your heater, everyone who has got one, we strongly encourage you to give that a go this winter.
My other question to you, Jenny, would be about like when you get people coming to you, let's say for, you know, for assessments to figure out where to best put their money. And we haven't really talked about insulation very much, but how do people start to weigh up those? Because it seems like it's going to be so expensive, but is it just as efficient to put money into that before you replace your appliances?
Yeah, look, we tend to do them hand in hand. So that's always my advice to people, but I understand people have limited budgets. So in which case I always actually go for the energy efficiency upgrades to your building envelope first. So the insulation and draft sealing will dramatically, you know, as Alan said, if you've still got gas heating, before you even make the switch, is going to dramatically reduce your consumption, and it will dramatically improve your comfort and your health too. So it has these extra bonuses. So insulation and draft sealing, incredibly boring, I know, everybody, but they really are so effective. I know they're not boring to you, Anne and Alan or Rachel, but to the crowd they may not be so excited, but those things really will help you massively, and they're not particularly expensive. They're not as glamorous as double glazing, but they're far more cost effective, the thermal bang for buck from those two things. So really encourage that. And then once you've done those things, the size of the heating appliances you need in particular will be much smaller. So, you know, at the moment in the ACT and large chunks of southeastern Australia, people have got these big, powerful, inefficient ducted gas systems because it's the only way to make these silly leaky houses feel comfortable. Once you've done those other things, a split system or a couple of reverse cycle air conditioners or heat pumps can do the job really easily. A lot of people doubt that, but if you insulate and draft seal, then you really can have that same level of comfort with much less energy.
Yeah, you're right. It's an incredibly unsexy thing to talk about because we're kind of into talking about these brand spanking new tech pieces like heat pumps, which are all of the rage at the moment. But I agree, you know, having lived now in the first home that has proper insulation, I can see why it's just, it makes everything so much more efficient. We did kind of skip over the health implications, so I might just jump back to that for a second. You've talked a little bit about that. Do you want to just expand on that, Jenny, in terms of climate comfort? And then we might talk a little bit bigger about the bigger picture health implications as well.
Sure. You know, well, yeah, if you're not comfortable in your home, if you can't maintain your house at a comfortable temperature, it's not good for your health. Gas also brings in the complication of indoor air quality impacts. You know, you're burning a fossil fuel, you're generating methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous dioxide, carbon monoxide. Those things are not great to be breathing in, and they're proven to exacerbate, you know, bronchitis and asthma and other health issues, like the person in the original video, or the video at the start mentioned. So it's really not great, and particularly around young children. Also, the safety issue of having a naked flame, you know, in your kitchen. Who wants that? I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but then combining.
There's also mold.
Yes, absolutely, mold. So the moisture levels in a home with gas, and so look, there's all sorts of benefits. It does. It blows people away. We find when they actually make these changes. So and that's often the biggest feedback we get is we can't believe how comfy the house is now, how quiet it is. So yeah, don't underestimate that. And you know, health is incredibly important. There's a terrific study come out of Victoria recently showing that investing in energy efficiency has profound impacts on health. So it makes such great sense. So that's, I probably raved enough about that, did I?
Right. Alan, did you want to talk about some bigger health impacts?
Well, also a few other things. For example, in a lot of parts of Australia, you are allowed to install unflued gas heaters, which produce quite a lot of water vapor, which condenses and creates mold, and potentially seriously affects indoor air quality in still weather, when even having the official ventilation level is not doing a job. So we go on about these things, but there's certainly those issues. And I think it's worth pointing out, Sustainability Victoria last year produced a report called Healthy Homes, and they upgraded the energy performance of some homes of elderly people and documented everything that was going on. And the reduction in health costs, a lot of which was captured by state and federal governments, was 10 times as much as the still worthwhile energy savings. So keep in mind that there's a bigger picture here for sure, as Jenny was touching on. But yeah, I mean, again, it's really about getting off all fossil fuels, but you know, we are in deep trouble on climate change. And I mean, anyone who's read a newspaper or watched a news show this recently, you know, what we have to keep in mind is that we have to do everything as fast as we can. And that's where Anne was talking about the Victorian government wanting to focus on using the existing commercially viable products to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels as fast as we can is really important. So from that point of view, also the other thing too is that increasingly people are needing air conditioning in extreme weather, and that's why lots of people are buying a reverse cycle air conditioner. So you're getting a free heater when you buy your cooling. You know, this is the way it plays out.
But there has been a fair bit of, I don't know, discussion around what happens to the system if we all go electric. Like, is that a real fear that we have to?
I think that's where we come back to this issue of we have to efficiently electrify. And that's where, I mean, for example, if you replace your electric hot water service with a heat pump water heater, the amount of electricity you're saving would run your electric car. Right?
So,
I mean,
absolutely,
so there's pros and cons in this.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in on that? You know, just from a Victorian perspective, but where, you know, Victoria is the state that's probably the poster child for the biggest gas substitution task that we're facing. All the analysis the Victorian government has done suggests that that's not a problem in Victoria. Our electricity system is designed for summer peak demand. So whenever on a hot day, when everyone's got their their cooling on, substituting gas heating, switching it over to electric, which is the biggest task and our biggest gas use, would at most bring that up to something equivalent to the peak demand that we're already experiencing in summer. So we are not thinking that electrification is going to pose significant additional infrastructure investment costs or burdens. As Alan says, it's all about making sure that, though, that we do that in a way that manages demand, that's not just about reducing peak demand, but shifting demand to different times, spreading demand. You know, demand response enabled appliances can be very useful for, you know, for instance, using your hot water as a solar soak, so that you're heating your water when you've got solar available. All of those sorts of things are part of the mix as well, so that we don't end up having growth over time. That means that we need to then still invest in infrastructure. But certainly at the moment, really the issue is that winter electricity demand is significantly lower than summer in Victoria at the moment. All electrification would be bring them a bit more closer to each other.
Renew is a non-profit member organisation. Along with creating the Getting Off Gas Toolkit, we also inform government policy, advocate for a fair energy transition, facilitate events like Sustainable House Day, and publish 2 magazines. Sanctuary Magazine provides trusted independent information for people looking to build or renovate sustainably. Renew Magazine is a leading voice on sustainable technology developments shaping the energy transition. These magazines grew from member newsletters in the 1980s and still maintain their grassroots independence and practical approach. Both are incredible resources, and subscribing is a great way to support us to transform Australian homes for climate and energy resilience.
So we've still got a little bit more time before we get fully stuck into the questions from the audience, but I guess we are going to want to talk a bit about rebates and opportunities there. You mentioned it earlier, Jenny, and I will put a plug in for the gettingoffgastoolkit.com site that has, as far as I know, the most updated list of all of the rebates and concessions that are currently available across every state. And I know this because I wrote it. But how do people find, other than that toolkit, how can people share that information? Or, how do they find out if they're eligible?
I might cut in before Anne goes on about all of the government things. One of the problems is the incentives keep changing. So, as you would know, Rachel, keeping up to date with them is a challenge. But I think, broadly there is a trend towards greater incentives and support to change to efficient electric technologies. So it's certainly worth doing. I actually find some of the local community groups can be really great, and they also, some of them are doing, volunteers are going into people's homes. They're doing bulk purchasing, and one of the benefits of bulk purchasing is that if quite a lot of people in one area get an installation done by the same people, if anything goes wrong, you've got other people who are likely to have the same problem, and you can kind of build up your momentum instead of feeling vulnerable yourself. So I think the local approach is pretty good. And a lot of environment groups are doing a lot of work in this getting off gas area. In fact, I was working with a not-for-profit trying to produce some fact sheets on this stuff. And it's like we got to the point where we said, what's the point? There's all this other great stuff coming from people like Renew and Environment Victoria. So let's just do something else.
Oh, it's probably a better use of your time.
Exactly.
Yeah. My other question was also going to be about, is there any point waiting for the next round? So the announcement was made in the budget, and how is that going to impact that there is money being spent on energy efficiency for households, and is it worth waiting, or is it something that people should get onto sooner rather than later?
Without responding to the question around the budget, wasn't sure if you meant federal budget or state, but I think really the key message here is we're not necessarily talking about ripping everything out and replacing it with electric appliances tomorrow. The really key opportunity is end-of-life appliance replacement and renovation, and new builds, obviously. So that opportunity is always there. And if you don't grab it now, it might be another 15 years, or some of those gas ducted heating systems last for like 25 years, like they just will not die. So, I think the key message is grab the opportunity when it comes up. And if, as Jenny's mentioned before, you already have a plan, or if you're in Victoria where something like a VEU works a little bit like STCs, so basically that just changes the upfront cost for you. You don't necessarily have to really access that rebate. Then, the main decision is just having worked out, if this dies, what else would we go for? And I mean, we did a bit of a back of the envelope calculation the other day. So this is not official Victorian government data, okay? But we estimated there's something like 2 million end-of-life replacement opportunities between now and 2030 in Victoria. We 100% have to capture a lot of them. So for me, it's not necessarily about going now or waiting. It's about when you've got your next opportunity, are you equipped and ready to take advantage?
I think the other thing too is this whole situation reminds me a lot of the dilemmas we used to face when we were buying computers. It's like, I know that 6 weeks after I buy this computer, there'll be a cheaper, better one. And at some point you just say, look, I'm just going to do it.
Look, I think that's true, Alan, but I think also I would probably just reiterate the whole mature technology situation in the residential space. There's no doubt that there's a lot of people who are keen to look at, I don't know, hydrogen powered cars or, whatever, kryptonite powered cooking tops or whatever. But the bottom line is heat pump technology, which is basically what reverse cycle air conditioners and heat pump hot water are, have gone on a bit of a journey over the last 10 or 15, 20 years, but now they are pretty cost effective for a pretty high quality unit. And yes, there will continue to be all sorts of fun demand response enabled stuff coming out that you can control remotely and all of that sort of stuff. And there will be a certain part of the market that loves that sort of stuff. But for most people, I think they just want hot water and they just want heating that works. And I think the main message we really need to get out there, because, we're aware that some of that early technology when it was emerging probably didn't give itself a great name in some parts, whether that was the fault of the technology or the installation or the settings or whatever, who knows. But I think the main message is you might have heard bad stories about heat pump hot water in the past, but your modern heat pump hot water is really good.
Before we get too stuck down the appliances,
yeah, sorry,
we're doing a whole session.
Another thing about appliances. Yeah.
So I'm more than happy to we'll get right into the nitty-gritties of appliances next week. I think my next question was actually going to be about misunderstandings and or misinformation. So I think to counter, for us, obviously, there's a lot of no-brainers here. But when you start talking beyond, you realize that there's a lot of other information. So I guess maybe my question to each of you would be to think of one piece of misinformation that you really want to counter in this whole conversation. It can be about efficiency, it can be about appliances, can be about cost, or any of those.
Oh, one of my favourite ones is that induction cooking is nowhere near as good as gas cooking, and that's just garbage. You'll love it, believe me. I've seen hundreds of clients go through it, switch from gas to induction and love it. So that's a really obvious one, but it does seem to be quite a hurdle for some people. People have got this idea that gas cooking is the be-all and end-all, and induction is wonderful, gives you fine control, and it's so much easier to clean. You'll love it.
Yeah, that's another area that's had to have a bit of a technological makeover in terms of recognising it's not the same as electric cooking was for many of us.
Yeah.
Alan, do you have a misunderstanding or
Well, I think actually one of the big issues we've got to face is the problems with ducted heating systems, whether they're gas or electric.
Mm-hmm.
Because the problem with these systems is that they usually only have one thermostat in the middle of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you can't easily control the temperatures in all the rest of the house. And so it's actually a real problem in trying to manage things. Also, ducted systems have got a tendency to suck outside air from the laundry or the toilet or whatever that's near the return air register, which means you're blowing a lot of your conditioned air out of your building and sucking in a lot of cold or hot air. So that's where the multi-splits and other individual units, room units are important. Also, I think it's important that most reverse cycle air conditioners have been installed for cooling. The major manufacturers do actually make very good floor-mounted reverse cycle air conditioners that blow the warm air across the floor. And they don't advertise them. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that not every home is going to require the same, whether the wall mounted or floor mounted is going to be applicable to that home, because every house is they're all going to be laid out differently. Or
also, yes, the best ones of the floor mounted ones are really nifty because they blow the warm air out across the floor, but then they have another vent that opens up at the top so that in summer they blow the cool air up towards the ceiling, which is where it needs to go. So there's lots of really nifty opportunities that we sort of stereotype lots of solutions and don't necessarily.
I can't help but follow on now that you've talked about ducting, Alan, because it's another one of my favourite topics I could talk about forever. But of course, ducted systems are so inefficient. And that's one of the things I still have to overcome with some of our clients, is that when we are switching from a ducted gas system, I explained that you don't need any longer a ducted electric system. And there are all these problems with ducted systems that Alan's already mentioned some of them. The other classic things are they create great big holes in your insulation and opportunities for air leakage. And I can assure you that when we test houses with older ducted systems, that those ducts are dirty and often have air gaps in them. So you're often pumping a lot of that precious heat or coolant into your subfloor or into your roof space. So don't think ducting's the best, everybody. It really is not. There are much better options.
Or as we had, or someone close to me had recently, a vermin problem also.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
Anne, did you want to add to that?
Well, look, I might just go with the really obvious one, which is that, we, all of us Australians, have been told for decades that natural gas is a clean and green fuel. And we have some work to do to undo that. We're now all of a sudden basically doing a 180 degree and telling people, oh no, now it's not. And again, I guess harking back to those of us who haven't been tracking the energy transition possibly quite as closely as we have, feel like that's been a bit of a whiplash sort of shift that, oh, hang on, you were telling me electricity is dirty, now you're telling me gas is dirty. And it's really just actually that the electricity transition really is cranking along, and possibly faster, not as fast as we need it, but faster than many people have noticed. So we are definitely going to be seeing plenty of advertising out there in the public space that will continue to promote the clean green image of gas. But I think overcoming or helping to explain to people that in fact, as our electricity is increasingly renewables powered, relatively speaking, gas then becomes the next biggest emitter, and we keep calling it fossil gas instead of natural gas. That's going to be a big misunderstanding. Can I just add one tiny little furphy as well, Rachel, which is that I think what we also get a lot of is but what about this and what about that examples. So, well, what about hospitals? What about apartments? What about office buildings? And look, it's really true, particularly in the commercial building space. It's a hugely diverse space. Lots of different building archetypes. Certainly from a retrofitting point of view, there are some big challenges there in terms of different tech, the space for the tech, all of that sort of stuff. But I think the big thing we need to just push back on is the yes and, which is, the yes, but lots of good opportunities here right now, and to focus on that.
Yeah, and for some people it might not be the right time. Like you said, it's a timing issue, end of life of appliances, when you're doing a renovation, when you can afford to do a renovation. So it is for some people, oh gosh, I wish that these heat pumps would have been around 10 years ago when I did that, extension or whatever. But yes, the idea is we're getting the education out so that hopefully it can filter out into those communities that need to hear that there's alternatives and that they don't have to just do the thing that tradie told them to do.
Can I add one? I suppose it's a misunderstanding, which is an incredible number of people don't realise that you really need to clean the filter of your reverse cycle air conditioner fairly regularly. And Wollongong University did a study a while back and found that a $200 call out was very commonly just to clean the filter. And I have friends who didn't know their air conditioners had a filter.
I could show you some terrible photos of our filters from just a couple of months ago, Ellen. I was embarrassed that I hadn't looked at them for so long.
We are going to get into some of this next week, and also with the tradies in week 4 when we talk about all the things with the trades. So I'm going to start to pull in some of the questions from the audience, and thank you everyone for submitting questions. I can see that there's a wild chat happening down there. The first question I wanted to ask was from Carolyn, and it was basically about power outages, which is a real issue for some people. So Carolyn says in summer we have power outages, and so how do we manage full electric?
Well, your gas heater and your instantaneous gas water heater will not operate without electricity. So you actually have to keep in mind that we are more dependent on reliable electricity than gas. So a gas heater needs a fan. A gas instantaneous unit has an electronic ignition system. They don't work without electricity. So it's a problem whatever we deal with, and it comes back to the fact that we need a very reliable electricity system, because let's face it, a lot of people are more distressed by a blackout that wipes out their internet than a lot of other things. So that's where community batteries or local distributed battery solutions, smart management controls, batteries in homes, plug-in electric vehicles that can run your house. We're in the early days of all these options, but we do need reliability, and the electricity industry in Australia does do a pretty good job. But if there are outages on a really hot day and you're in a west-facing apartment, you need to get out quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's where the energy efficiency upgrades to your building envelope, that insulation and draft ceiling and the shading of external windows, what I didn't mention before, is so important, so that if you are without heating in winter or cooling in summer, that your home isn't going to turn into an oven or an ice box as quickly, or hopefully not at all. But apartments are a big problem in that situation, absolutely. Yeah.
That is a good question to ask as well about, we haven't devoted much time to renters and apartments in this series, so we might maybe put a couple questions in now about what are the options, and are there many options? Especially we can do renters separately to apartments, but what could people in apartments start to be doing?
I know I've certainly helped my kids when they lived in apartments. Again, west-facing apartment my daughter lived in Melbourne. Our solution for her was to get cardboard boxes and chop them up and simply tape them to the outside of the windows. So shading, if you've got an opportunity to shade a window, do it on the outside, everyone. Don't rely on your internal window dressings. That can help, but you want to stop the sun from striking the glass. And honestly, it can be anything, whether it's cardboard or a sheet or a tarpaulin, bulldog clip to the gutter or something safe. Obviously in an apartment you might not be able to do that, but stopping the sun striking the glass if you can. In terms of internally, if you don't have good window dressings, bubble wrap is a great one I've used with many people for many years. And then the old tricks of just reducing the amount you use. So shorter showers, bathroom timers, using the cold cycle on your washing machine and other things, and not using gas heating if you've got it, and perhaps employing electric forms if you can, freestanding. But yeah, it can be tricky. I've got it, and my daughter's now in Wollongong in a freezing house.
Yeah, we do have a section on renting, but it is a bit sad to see that there's not a whole lot that people can advocate for at this point until we have minimum standards for renters.
There's an interesting Melbourne developed product called Illume Sol Share, which allows a single large solar system to be equitably shared amongst all of the people in apartments, and you still have your own electricity meter, so you can choose who your retailer is and things like that. The Geelong Sustainability Group have just formed a partnership with Illume and with some solar providers and others to start a pilot project.
Brilliant.
Helping apartment people to transition to things like that. So look, things are on their way, but we do come back to the perennial landlord-tenant tensions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, governments are going to have to fix it.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's my prompt for saying that, Victoria is introducing mandatory efficiency standards. It is a staged process. There are commitments to, there's a heater standard that's been introduced now that came into effect earlier this year, with more standards to come. But yeah, look, I think the point is well made in that we do talk a lot about renters, but it's the landlord's responsibility. And I think there are things that renters can do, but it's basically the onus should not be on them. And I think, from a I guess a public policy point of view, in trying to think about how do we attack the task that we're trying to do in Victoria of taking advantage of every one of those 2 million end-of-life appliance opportunities. Some of it is going to need to be economy-wide. I think, we are really just needing to be looking at, if you are the owner of a home, then here are your opportunities and here are things to encourage you to do it, and maybe other stuff down the track, who knows. And if you happen to have tenants in that property, well, that's fantastic, but that's great for those tenants. But really what we're needing to do is just basically get those appliances, wherever they are, electrified.
Yeah, and linking it to the investment to make it and incentivize it as if it is going to be.
Sure. Yep.
Investment for the landlords to make their house, the building envelope better.
Yep.
Put in.
I think that's where, in fact, having effective energy disclosure schemes can help, because there's certainly evidence around the world in the residential area, and very much so in the commercial area, that once you got an effective disclosure scheme, and I repeat, effective, most of them aren't, then there is perceived resale value.
Yeah.
And so in that context, if we can show landlords that they are making an investment that will pay off for them as well as the tenant, then they'll be more interested in taking an incentive. They may not work without one, but at least we can build a culture where a landlord sees investment in better performance and better appliances as an investment for them as well as the renter.
We were talking about that at our toolkit launch the other day, about using the term investment instead of talking about what it's going to cost. That we are investing in a healthier future, we are investing in healthier people, and we are investing hopefully in emissions reductions for everyone. So, but I will ask a question about cost, because maybe I'll start with you, Jenny. When you talk to people, I know it's such a piece of string question, but people want to know what the payback is and how do you start to put that into context for them?
I often direct them to the Make the Switch website, which has got a calculator, which does a pretty good job, I find. But, to put things into perspective for people here in Canberra, if you're looking, a lot of households have got all three big gas appliances. And if you're looking to switch out all three, and again, we stress, you don't have to do this all at once, make that plan. But if you were to, then it can easily hit $10,000. You could do it for less than that in a smaller home and for slightly cheaper options, although we again encourage people to go for the more efficient appliances, which tend to be a little bit more expensive, but it's usually worth that investment. Then the payback period here, using the Make the Switch calculator, shows that it's generally for all three can be as short as 10 or 11 years, and that might sound like a long time, but you will feel, as well as see that your costs reduce, you will feel the benefits immediately, I assure you. And again, team it up with some insulation and draft sealing, and you really won't know yourself, and you will not regret it. And as I stressed in my little promo video, we've never had anyone regret making this transition. But yeah, it is a chunk of money. Again, hence the planning, everyone. Plan for it. Yeah. And don't miss that opportunity.
Sorry.
I was going to say, when Anne talked about before about when people renovate, it might be the time they do it. What breaks my heart is when we have people contact us who have just completed a renovation and they haven't done any of these things, and they haven't insulated or draft sealed, let alone switched their appliances. And it, of course, also breaks my heart that new homes are still being built here in the ACT, where we've been talking about this stuff loudly for a long time. There are still new houses being built with gas appliances, which really shocks me. But yeah.
And I was just going to add to that to say, buying appliances for a whole house is a chunk of money either way. So what we need to be focusing on is what's the gap between a like-for-like appliance replacement and an efficient electric option. And in some cases, that might be a bit bigger, but not always.
No.
Like, again, speaking from Victoria, gas ducted heating systems are actually quite expensive.
Yeah.
And as Alan pointed out before, the advantage of an all electric home is that you've got your heating and cooling in one unit. So that is a bit of a saving as well.
Absolutely.
So I would also like to give you a bit of a plug for the calculator in the ACT, because I think it's great and we need more of that sort of thing. All I can offer from a Victorian point of view is, again, the fact sheets that are on the gas substitution roadmap page, which is not obviously going to be tailored to people's individual homes, but a scorecard assessment, if you do it, will be. But again, that just echoes what Jenny just said, that if you're looking at something like, say, I think this fact sheet's suggesting something like $14,000 in total for appliances and install costs for an annual energy saving of $1,250 a year. So that's, again, about that 10 or 11 year sort of payback mark. Not a bad payback for appliances that are going to last a fair bit longer than that.
And
sorry.
There you go.
Yeah, well, we come back to the problem that payback period is psychologically a very bad thing.
Yeah, true.
It makes you feel as though you're behind until then.
Yeah.
If you knock back a 5-year payback, you are knocking back 20% tax-free return on your investment. I don't know why. I mean, we deal with industry all the time, and it's like, oh, we want a 2-year payback, mate.
Yeah.
You want 50%. Can you get 50% interest
in any
on
other
your bank?
investment? Yeah.
This is just
it's bizarre a very good
stuff.
Point. Yeah, true. Yeah.
It's true. It's a difficult model, but it is a hard sell. Like we said, that, we've had gas appliances for 100 years now, at least, and we're taking a completely different tangent to say, hang on, we need to upgrade. We need to look at the different alternatives if you haven't already. There's a question here from Amy about I mean, not everyone's going to be as blessed to have services like yours. So where should people go to look to get the kind of assessment that they need for the appropriate products or changes for their home? I mean, is that just people who do the scorecard assessment, or is that architects, or yeah?
Well, I wish I could say it was architects, but not broadly speaking. But there are. I would come back to local councils and community groups. Check out in your local area. They're often fantastic local resources. Here in Canberra, we've got the ACT Conservation Foundation, who did the Make the Switch website. We've got a very active group called Sea Change that does a whole heap of great stuff. There's a Facebook group called My Efficient Electric Home, which has got lots of resources. And there are lots of people out there very willing to share their experience. And you will find some knowledgeable local tradies. We don't want to give the impression they're all anti going electric, and some of them really know their stuff. Do check out the options for you locally. You might be really pleasantly surprised. There may well be resources available.
And just to add to that, I forgot to mention earlier, the Climate Emergency Network, which is a network of local governments around the country that have all declared, any councils that have declared a climate emergency are part of the network, are rolling out the Electrify Everything toolkit, which means that there's a common sort of set of resources that are available in any of those councils, which I think is something like 200 councils across the country. I don't know if someone knows the number. Anyway, I think probably that you don't necessarily have to live in a particular LGA to be able to access those resources, but they are really designed to try to be a bit of a to-do list or guide. While it is going to be a big task, I just also want to reassure people that there is a lot of paddling going on under the surface in government to do that capacity building and skills training in the installing trades. As much because, plumbers and gas fitters are looking for new opportunities. Plumbers and gas fitters are looking to add to their qualifications so that they can also install heat pumps. Electricians and builders and other trades that might be making decisions about appliances going into new homes and renovations. There is a fair bit of work going on to try to reach those people. It won't happen overnight, but I guess just to bang the same old drum, as you always would anyway, I guess when you're getting quotes for things, you tend to get several of them and have the conversation with a bunch of people. And the more you can be a bit armed with your own information, so that you can respond to some of that nah mate, can't be done mate sort of stuff, and say, well, actually, this is what I would like to do, and if you can't do it, well, I'm going to have to go somewhere else. That helps, I guess, create an incentive for those trades to go, oh, gee, there seems to be a demand for this stuff here, I better get on board.
It's really hard, though. I know.
Yeah, it's really hard.
And from what I've heard from particularly, really switched on tradies, they're kind of really swamped with a lot of these kind of just general assessment jobs.
Yeah, that's true.
People want they trust that they're coming from the right place, and so they just want their to come and do such an assessment and talk to them about their options, because that's a tailored service, but there's not a whole lot of that. And so
I think that integrated advice and retrofit service, again, something that I think we're really mindful there's not a joined up, easily accessible, turning information into action type bridge. But I guess what I was talking about it more in the context of your hot water system fell over yesterday and now you're getting 3 quotes for a replacement. How do you have a conversation with the people that come and tell you that just sticking with what you've got is the best thing?
Well, there was a conversation this week about the new SEC being a potential place for that integrated service.
Don't hold your breath.
Don't hold your breath.
Look, I wanted to go back a bit. one of our really deep problems with information is we don't have enough independent testing and evaluation being done of the products. So, for example, I would like to look at the efficiency of a heat pump hot water service over the full range of temperatures. I can't find that. There's no formal requirement about what temperature should be used, ambient temperature should be used. So you can see two similar heat pumps with very different performance data in the advertisements. We are in really deep trouble with lack of quality information. When I ran the Energy Information Centre in the early 1980s, we had the Gas and Fuel Corporation research guys crawling over all the appliances, the SEC guys doing the same with electric appliances. CSIRO's building research team were doing fantastic measurement of insulation and appliances and buildings. We had a really solid resource, and it all disappeared in the 1990s when we reformed energy and destroyed the consumer's right to good information. Sorry, I'm grouchy about this one.
Fair enough.
A good point, because a lot of us might not have realized that it was ever there and that we had those resources available, because you're right. That's what the toolkit is trying to fill, is some of that kind of broad-based, reliable information. But ours is obviously based upon the, we're not doing the research. That's reliant on big money to do that research.
Yeah, the facilities to do that testing are expensive, which is why they used to be publicly funded. And, the universities have got almost nothing to do this kind of work either. So we seriously are uninformed. And I, as someone who gets lots of people asking me lots of questions about all these things, am constantly frustrated because I do not have the information I need to advise them well.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question that's just come in on this from Wendy about what to do about the issue of I've seen incentives coming in from the gas companies to get people to switch back. So what happens? I guess you poke the lion and the lion comes back. So what are we to do about this problem?
Tell all your friends to watch this webinar and turn up to the remaining ones in the series. But we have to. We as the consumers have to say no. When enough of that crap, please. We know what we need and we know what's right, and let's get on with it.
I mean, it's such a it's I don't know. I've seen like figures of $100, $200, $250. They're pretty small incentives, but for people, who can't handle the exorbitant gas and electricity bill that's just come in, it's very attractive, and you can see why they're doing it.
That's right. Look, there's not a lot I can say on this, but basically does come down to energy market regulation. We do have a regulated energy market. We have regulated prices. We have consumer law and regulated consumer protections. I think at least the Victorian government is very conscious of the fact that they're not just cost inequity, in terms of some people having more financial resources, obviously, than others, but there's definitely information inequity as well. And that we have an issue where just because not every single person is an energy nerd and has worked out just like that 20 years of gas communication has now flipped and gas is now the dirty fuel, risk being locked into higher energy bills and all the other impacts just because, the marvellous idea of choice meant that they got locked into something because they weren't aware that they could have done something else, and that there probably is a role for government there to help level that information playing field a little bit.
I feel like
do something about that.
I feel like you're taking on a representative of a lot of government here tonight, Anne. We appreciate that it's not all up to you as much as we would love it to be.
No, but look, I certainly that sort of, of course, privately owned entities can run their businesses and offer incentives for their product if they feel that they can afford it. The public policy challenge is, at what point does that start to run counter to broader, community interests, and what role is there for government in that? So, it's an issue.
There's a lot of work that government needs to be doing, I think, and they're going to tackle it maybe one little tiny piece of the pizza at a time. So we're nearly done, and I want to thank everyone for submitting your questions and for sticking around for this really interesting conversation. I'm going to ask the panel before we completely wrap up to give me your one takeaway. It doesn't have to be one line, but your one takeaway that you would like people to leave this webinar with. Jenny, do you want to go?
Sure. I'm going to be really boring and repetitive, but really do develop that plan. Literally think about what uses gas in your house now, what your insulation levels are like, whether your house is leaky. I think, what are the things I can change and gradually work toward, as we've stressed again and again, have that plan in place for when the hot water system dies or when the heating dies, so that you don't get trapped with another gas appliance.
Yeah, we haven't figured out if we're going to be able to integrate it into the toolkit, but one of our colleagues at Renew has an incredible spreadsheet that
that's what you're known for.
That she shared. Well, we haven't asked her if we're allowed to share her family spreadsheet, but it is incredible. Like, they've documented everything. So they've documented, the quotes that they've gotten, the conversations that they've had, some of the products that they've found, what they would do first, and then done it. Yeah, I mean, there's a few spreadsheet nerds out there that I'm sure would enjoy to do such a thing. But once you see it all lined up, and it starts to look a bit more like you're starting here and getting to there, then I'm sure it stops becoming so confounding and overwhelming as well. Yeah.
Who goes
Alan,
next?
do you have a takeaway?
Okay. I'll
Sorry, just sequentially on my screen.
Basically, we have to change from electrify everything to efficiently electrify everything. And I'm glad that Renew are using that language. And in fact, a recent study for the Energy Efficiency Council pointed out that 60% of the emission reduction through electrification is due to the efficiency of the appliances. So if you use an electric fan heater or a resistive electric hot water service, you are inefficiently electrifying. Just remember. And expensively.
Yeah. That's a good point. And Anne, your takeaway?
Well, look, both Jenny and Alan have said already what I was going to say, which was efficiency first, and then end of life replacement. So my takeaway is going to be just to reiterate that this is a whole of community, whole of economy challenge journey that we're on. Every individual household obviously has a role to play, but ultimately we really want to do this in a way that brings everybody along, that's fair, that doesn't leave people behind, and doesn't leave us with a whole lot of very expensive stranded assets that no one can afford to pay for. And that's a big part of the equity conversation. And so it is absolutely exciting to see how many people there are who are really taking action in their own lives to get on board. you know, government certainly needs to be doing everything we can to make that transition, you know, that leap from information to action as simple and easy as possible. But we also need to make sure that through a variety of different factors, other people making other decisions don't end up being locked into really bad cost of living and health and other outcomes. And that's really I guess, the wicked policy challenge.
Thank you. It is an important and sobering point to end up on, and something that we are thinking about a lot as we continue to work and roll out the toolkit to make it as accessible as we can to as many people as possible. So that brings us to the end of our session tonight. A huge thanks to our wonderful panelists and for your generosity and your time and your knowledge and all that you bring to Renew and to this webinar series. I thank you for coming along. I want to thank again our sponsors, Pure Electric, the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action, and Be Energy Efficient. We're also very grateful to our funders, the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Boundless Earth, for allowing us to do this really important work. So thank you to our audience. You've been great, and make sure to tune in to the next 3 events in this series. We're going to be doing choosing appliances, electrification and EVs and solar, and how it all connects together. And then we're doing a session on troubleshooting, wiring, plumbing, and all the tricky bits. So make sure you tune in for those. Thank you.